It starts with language. There are things that you simply can't say. Doesn't matter whether it's climate, whether it's COVID, whether it's Ukraine. Dissent is simply not allowed. If you criticize the genocide that's going on, for example, in Gaza at the moment, you're immediately labeled anti-Semitic. For evil to prevail, it only means that good men do nothing. And that's what you're dealing with here. Good men do nothing.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. In this episode, I spoke with Godfrey Bloom. I had Godfrey on the podcast back in March, and I wanted to do a second episode with him because there was so much that we didn't get into in that conversation. So in this one, we dove into his experiences in America, where he's just finished his book tour, and his thoughts on the social and political situation over there. We talked about the justice system and the decline of ethics, especially when it comes to the higher echelons of power. And finally, we talk about the ongoing wars in Israel and Palestine, as well as Russia and Ukraine. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have a huge amount of time for this conversation because Godfrey had another appointment. However, Godfrey has agreed to do a part 3, where we'll definitely have more time to go into these topics more deeply. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. I really enjoy talking to Godfrey. I think that he has a lot of wisdom to share, and for someone who has spent much of his life advocating for the kind of things that he talks about, I find it really inspiring that he still has so much energy and time to dedicate to talking about these issues. So if you do enjoy the episode, make sure you give it a like and a share on social media. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, make sure you give it a 5-star review in whichever podcast app you're using. If you're new to the Staying Free podcast, welcome. Be sure to subscribe for future episodes. And finally, if you're not already, please consider listening to the podcast on the Fountain app, where you can help support the show by streaming sats as you listen. And you can also leave boost there, which I will read out at the beginning of the show. I didn't get any boost yet on my last episode because I'm actually recording this one very shortly after publishing that one. So if between me posting this one, you leave a boost on the last episode, I'll make sure that I read that one in the next episode, as well as any that you leave here as well. As always, any way you can support me is hugely appreciated. And I do also have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description as well, so you can give a regular donation there too. All right, on to the episode with Godfrey Bloom. Godfrey, welcome back to the Staying Free podcast. It's great to have you back for part 2. I really enjoyed our first conversation, and looking forward to getting into some additional topics with you today that we didn't cover in the last one. So how have you been, Godfrey?
Yeah, in good form. We've been climbing in the Lakeland Fells, and I've been promoting my book in New York, and we decided to sail. So I sailed on the Queen Mary to New York, which made a nice change from airports. Very nice indeed.
How long did it take to do that trip? I always wonder that.
Five nights out and 5 nights back.
Oh, great. I guess that's the way a lot of people are going to be traveling once they ban airplanes, right?
Well,
if we can travel at all, of course.
We could travel at all. They don't like it. The little people aren't allowed to travel, of course. Only royalty and celebrities are allowed to travel. We've got to remember that. There's something special about them.
Did you just do it for the enjoyment of it, or was there any reason in particular?
It was a little bit of a bucket list thing, really. I wanted to cross. It's the last serious liner. It's a real liner. It isn't a cruise per se. It's a liner, and that's what it does. It goes from Southampton to New York, and the food was magnificent. I don't know whether the taxman is going to allow it. We travelled first class. I want to put it down against my tax return. I've got a suspicion that he'll say, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, I suspect the same. If
I'd flown, you'd have said it was all right. If I'd flown first class, you would have said it's all right. But anyway, I might put a bit of it down. Bloody good food.
See what you can get away with.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. All right, so let's just talk first of all. I know you've been doing this book tour in America. So I thought it might be a good place to start there. What was your experience of America? How did you find it over there? You know, I mean, last time I was in America, I definitely felt that there had been a significant decline, especially in the cities. And I'm wondering if you experienced the same thing or what your general thoughts were there.
I've now clocked up on speeches and book tours and all sorts of stuff, 35 states. So I visited 35 states. But of course, that's been over a period of time. And I think it's a little bit the same as Britain. Big city bad, rural communities good. And it seems to be the same all over the world. Well, certainly all over the Western world. Countryside, country communities, small towns, villages, all good. I live in a tiny village. We have a small holding in East Yorkshire, Howdenshire, which is a little bit of East Yorkshire, and the world passes us by. And I think the same with America. If you go, if you go up to Wyoming or Montana or places or Santa Fe and so on and so forth, it's all pretty okay. But if you go off Main Street in Baltimore, you'll get your throat cut. And I think that's fairly true and of course, what has really jeopardized the United States, of course, is the open border. Indeed, it's jeopardizing our open border. We have the same system of open borders, so which is a direct assault on your culture, your way of life, and everything else. You don't know who's coming in. It affects crime rates and so on and so forth. So there is a worry. There is a worry which is shared by them and us. I'm not quite sure how America's going to get out of it. I am fairly radical in my view. I think the days of the United States have gone. I can't see the point. I don't know what California has in common with Wyoming. I cannot see why have they abandoned their constitution, which is a fairly good document. Why are they ruled with a rod of iron from Washington, which was never the idea in 1776 at all. But then that was abandoned arguably in 1861 when they had what they call a civil war. But what wasn't a civil war, the North invaded the South. But not a civil war. We had a civil war. One of our civil wars was brother against brother, son against father. It wasn't regionally based particularly. It wasn't class based particularly. So we had a civil war, parliamentarians versus royalties. They didn't have that. They had a North versus South clash. And so consequently, that's when they really, in 1861, abandoned their constitution. That was the first time they totally abandoned their constitution. I think they're paying a high price for that now.
That's interesting. I've not heard that before. So I actually want to stick on that topic just out of my own curiosity. So you said that it was a North versus South invasion, but were all of the states not under the same unified government prior to that?
The states had a very strong independence, and they strong independence under the Constitution. But it was never the intention in 1776 and the American Constitution that you had to be part of the United States at bayonet point. That was never the idea. It was a voluntary association. The state governments would run themselves, and they would pool their resources in Washington when it was suitable so to do. But no, what they've got now is not the intention of the Constitution. It was not the intention of the Declaration of Independence. And that is one of the problems that they have, that the states can't, you've got the Bible Belt, you've got the South, you've got different attitude to taxation, tariffs, and all sorts of different things. You can't really chuck them all into one homogenous pot. It just doesn't work. And it's clearly not working now. So I think that is the problem. And they've got to think it through. If the states could get their control back of their states, so what they want in Kansas isn't what they want in New Mexico, so on and so forth. You have to let them do that. People go on their way. It's about freedom. People want to live under their local government, elected government. They don't want orders from Washington any more than we up in Yorkshire here want to be told what to do by Whitehall or Brussels or Davos, of course, which is now Davos has replaced Brussels now, as I knew it would. So we thought we were getting self-government back, a parliamentary constitutional monarchy, the power of parliament, the power of representative democracy, but it's all gone because now we're run by the World Economic Forum. And of course, now we're waiting for Keir Starmer to be the new prime minister, who was very honest about it last Davos when he was interviewed by the BBC. And they said, where is the power, where the power should be? Should it be Parliament or should it be here in Davos? And he said, Davos. So, I mean, you've got to give him credit for honesty. So consequently, we are no longer a self-governing nation. And the other problem, of course, that we have is we no longer have a free press. We do not have a free press. Dissent is not allowed. In anything, it doesn't matter whether it's climate, whether it's COVID, whether it's Ukraine. Dissent is simply not allowed. The BBC and Sky TV and even newspapers like the Daily Telegraph will give you the deep state party line, and that's it. And you'll be cut off from social media pretty damn quickly if you challenge it, or at least certainly you used to be. And YouTube will still take you down if you're radical, as I am.
Okay, so you just touched on probably about 4 or 5 things that I wanted to get into with you. So I'm gonna try and tackle them one by one, but we'll move across the globe here. So I want to stick with America, and then I do want to kind of like move the focus to Europe and the UK as well. So just first of all, sticking with America, how I've been seeing a lot of videos recently of Biden's cognitive decline, and this is something that like it's not new. It's been going on for those who've been paying attention probably for about 4 years, I would say at least, maybe even more than that. But now it's like every single Biden appearance, it's just a complete shit show. Now, what do you make of that? Because, you know, you've got some experience in politics. I have absolutely no experience whatsoever in politics. I cannot get on board with the idea that this is just, oh, you know, he's just, there's this cognitive decline going on and they're trying to cover it up and they're doing their best with a bad situation. It seems to me like this is deliberate. They want the world to see that, you know, the king has fallen in a way, like the king of the empire, you know, America, the most powerful nation in the world. It's almost like they want to embarrass America on the world stage. I just cannot see this being an accident. You know, these people are pretty smart, and if they wanted a good, you know, on the face good candidate, you know, someone like Obama, a good talker, they could get one. What do you make of all of this this Biden stuff?
Well, it's very difficult to actually understand. I had 10 years in politics. I was in the City of London for most of my career, and a little bit of military. But certainly it was new for me to be in politics. I think what you have to understand, it's over there is no different. Politicians as a genre have, first off, no moral dynamic. They have no moral dynamic at all. They are, and the leaders certainly in this country, and I'm quite sure it's perfectly true in America, leaders are sociopaths. In politics, you have to be a sociopath. So you and I would behave in a certain way in business or in our social life. And in the main, if we're not saints, of course, but if we shake hands on a deal, that's the deal, because that's good business. And our relationship with our family and friends, we would have no family and no friends left if we behaved like most politicians. And of course, if you look at the Labour Party brothers, I mean, it's brother on brother. Brother stabbed brother in the back. And of course, your main enemy is not in your own party. Your main enemy in politics is the man from your own party who wants your job. So that's basically the problem. There's no moral dynamic involved in politics. That's a big stumbling block for people. Now, the other thing is that when you say they're pretty smart people, well, okay, let's pick up on that if I may.
Well, actually, let me just caveat that. I wouldn't say they're very smart people as in the person, you know, the president, let's say. I'm talking here about the string pullers behind the scenes, the people who put the front man there. Yeah, I think that they are, at least some of them I suspect are smart, because they're smart enough to, you know, they're smart enough. Like, although you and I obviously saw things like the COVID scam for what it was, these people ran a pretty good show, you know, like they did pretty well at convincing the world. They're good at pulling the wool over people's eyes, put it that way. So at least they're smart in that respect.
Yes, I would say they're cunning like a fox. You know, fox isn't an intellectual animal, but it's very cunning and difficult to chase. I've chased many a fox. So, yeah. But now here, let's just look a little bit behind the scenes. I think we could all agree that the average member of British Parliament and the average member of Congress is both corrupt and stupid. You know, that's a given. Nobody disputes that in my local pub, and I'm sure your local bars too. They're corrupt and they're stupid. So yeah, okay, that's straight off. Let's look at the string pullers for just a moment. I have visited Heritage Foundation, the Economic Enterprise Institution, the Brookings Institute. I've been to all these places in my political life in Washington at quite a high level, you know, quite a senior level. Now, Brooks Brothers, the Brookings Institute I went to see some people there, and it was in and around the Iraq war and conflict and so on and so forth. And I was also at the Royal College of Defence Studies, where I graduated in geopolitical matters, where I was on there with one-star generals and admirals from the United States Army and Navy, as indeed they were one-star with Britain. So I've done all this kind of thing. And it prompted the question, having worked with these people, incidentally, with whom I get on extremely well, and in no way am I anti-American, and I've got lots and lots and lots of American friends, most of whom agree with my assessment of America, incidentally. The problem that we have on this Iraq thing, I said, what is your end game? What is your war aim in Iraq? Yeah, what is your war aim? Which is a perfectly legitimate question for somebody like me who's graduate in geopolitical military history to ask. And the response I got, and this is from the Brookings Institute, which in part advises the United States State Department, and the response I got was, hey, Godfrey, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. It sums up American foreign policy. They have no war aim ever, but they have war after war after war, which they always lose with no war aim. Because war for America is how their economy functions. As Eisenhower warned us, it's the military-industrial congressional complex. That's how it works. Now there's huge money. There's $1 trillion budget. There's an unaudited huge CIA budget. So you have all these things. So we would not know who the string pullers are. We wouldn't know them, because they are the ones, you're quite right, who are smart. They're controlling it, and they're controlling the money. And of course, parliamentarians here and the congressmen in Washington, you can buy them for pennies. You can buy them for pennies. Big military business, $100,000 here, a couple of $100,000 there to the campaign funds and all the rest of it. It's nothing to these big people. But you can buy a congressman. I sometimes watch the Senate cross-examination, for example, of the Supreme people who want to get to the Supreme Court, judges, American judges, and so on as well. I watched a cross-examination by various senators, for example. These people in the judiciary, for example, are fascinatingly stupid and ideologues and politicized, as indeed they are in this country. I'm not just having a pop at America. The people who sit on the bench in Great Britain at the moment, give you an example just the other day, you may have picked it up, but I doubt it. An illegal immigrant raped a 13-year-old girl, was tried and found guilty and was given 180 days community service. Another man put a notice in his window in Hull, which is a town not far from me. He says, it's okay to be white. He's got 2 years in Hull prison. This shows you the depth of corruption in our judiciary, and indeed the American judiciary is defunct. And of course, there was a case in New York State the other day where I take one quote away because it was Carbon Mike, who's been given 10 years in prison for doing something. We won't go down that rabbit hole. But the judge actually said, when his lawyer tried to cite the Second Amendment of the Constitution, and her response was, I do not recognize the Second Amendment in my court. These are the sort of people that we're dealing with. America's dealing with, we're dealing with people who would never have got on to the bench 30 or 40 years ago. It started with Tony Blair. I don't know who it started with in America, probably the Clintons, where the whole system is grossly corrupt. And everybody knows, pretty well everybody knows it. The man on the Clapham omnibus knows it. Joe Sixpack knows it, and just doesn't really know what to do about it. What you can't do is vote your way out of it. There is nobody to vote for to get you out of this, either here or in North America. You can't say, I'm going to vote them out, because you'll just get the same people coming in. So, it's a complete failure of democracy. or as Hans Hopper said, his book, The Death of the God Democracy. Yeah, he says it can't work, it won't work, and this is why it can't work. And it's all very difficult. It's all very difficult. I wish I had an easy answer.
Yeah, just on a couple of things that you mentioned there with regards to the guy who had the flag in his window who's been gone down for 2 years, and then there's a immigrant rapist who has only got community service. Like, how have we got here, Godfrey? Like, what has actually happened? Is this just the kind of slow degeneracy of wokeism, or is there something behind it? Because I always try to kind of look upstream of the events that happen and say, like, what's at the root here? What's at the core that's causing this? And normally that cause tends to be money or something related to the economy, which is, that kind of, I guess that value layer or communication layer behind society that seems to kind of move things. And is that the root of this, or is it literally just that our characters have become somehow corrupted inexplicably? Like, where do you see the root of all of this craziness when it comes to, you can't have a flag in your window saying, I mean, I'm not saying, like, personally, I wouldn't care to put a flag in my window like that, but you can imagine that if someone wasn't white, if someone was black and they put a flag in the window saying it's okay to be black, they're not going to get any kind of prison time for doing that, right? So it's just this kind of complete two-sidedness, which, at the root of that, like I said, it's wokeism. But where does that all come from in your view?
Well, it's a difficult question, but certainly when I was sponsoring and a guest lecture at Cambridge University, for example, which I was, I don't know how long ago that was now, 15 years ago, perhaps, a bit more, I can't remember. Anyway, you were finding a new kind of undergraduate. You were finding, and then outside the rugby club and the boozers and stuff, and the public school boys who were there, who haven't really changed very much, but you found very political animals, very, very political individuals. So, for example, you would get people, let's say, reading law. They would be highly politicized, probably Marxists or something like that, or whatever, very articulate, very hostile. They'd go into the law, and when Blair politicized the judiciary in the late 90s, those people were selected on the basis of their political views for the bench. So it would start off perhaps as as a district judge, where you used to call them stipendiary magistrates, but then they would go to a district court, then they'd go to a crown court, so on and so forth. And it wasn't very long before these people actually sit on the woolsack. And the next thing you know, you have a very highly politicized Supreme court and attorney. And this is certainly true of America. There's no question about it. And if you look at those Senate inquiries, promotion to the Supreme Court, so on and so forth, it screams at you. It screams at you. It's not even subtly hidden. So you do have this ideological view. And if you discuss, as I have with lawyers, if you discuss with them their concept of the law, their idea of the law, their ethos, they don't think like you and I might think. So the law, and enshrined in common law, for example, in the 1930s, I can't remember offhand the name of the judge, he said, but the concept of law is what is deemed to be fair by the man on the Clapham omnibus. What is deemed to be fair? We haven't had that for a generation. The people are going, how did that happen? Like the instance I just gave you. How could that possibly happen? We do not have that ethos. We have the principles of law. We have trial by jury. We have the presumption of innocence, so on and so forth. We have all these things. You talk to a modern lawyer about that, or the Bill of Rights, or the Toleration Acts, he won't know what you're talking about. He won't know what you're talking about. He is only interested in a political ideal, and if he can pick up as much money on the way as he can in fees, normally for left-wing taxpayer-funded ideology. So these are the sort of people that are coming. Your Lord Goddards and people like this, and your Lord Dennings, the great legal minds of yesteryear, aren't there. They're not even waiting in the wings. They don't know what they should be. To give you another example, my wife is an equine physiotherapist, and she was giving a lecture, funny enough, at Cambridge as well, the veterinary science wing, and she was giving this lecture to third-year undergraduates, vets, which you and I would automatically assume is a vocational profession. And the first question she had, right, it's any questions now, okay. The first question she said, what is the fee structure with an equine physiotherapist and a vet? What is the fee structure? How degraded can a 21 or 22-year-old undergraduate be going into that profession that she would ask such a question? And you'll probably remember, or you might have seen, that All Creatures Great and Small, about the vets, the rural vets, where they were vocational. To be a vet was a vocation, as it was with being a GP. But it's the same with GPs. GPs aren't vocational now. Very, very few GPs are vocational. All they do is they pass their exams and they can't wait to get their hand in the till. And we saw that in COVID. Jab, 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 jab at $26 a go. Doesn't matter what they're jabbing. They're not interested. They don't do any homework, no risk awareness, no critical thinking involved at all. Jab, jab, jab at $26. So I'm going to buy a new BMW. Oh, and I'm going to a golf day, but Pfizer are putting on a big golf day. I'm looking forward to that. That's who we have now. And of course, that's what happens at the Mayo Clinic, for example, or the American system is just the same. Jab, 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 $25.
Yeah, I mean, there does seem to be just so many kind of mixed incentives going on there. And, I agree with a lot of what you say, but I just keep coming back to, like, why has it emerged in the way that it has, whereby in order to have any power, you have to, for example, kind of signal for this kind of like these wokest policies. I don't know why it's emerged that that's the way that you get power. Like, I'm not sure what's flipped it. You know what I mean? So previously, as you say, we had things like the Bill of Rights and the presumption of innocence and all these things. I'm not sure what the thing is, what the kind of catalyst is that it's flipped so that the way to obtain power is through a kind of distortion of these fundamental principles. Like, do you see what I'm getting at here, Godfrey?
Yes, I do. And I think if you haven't seen it, if you Google, or any of your subscribers Google Dr. David Starkey, his recent lecture on this very subject, and he will point out, indeed I totally agree with him, that it starts with language. It starts with language. And if you can control language, you can control what is printed and what is said in mainstream media. So you can circumnavigate a free media, a free press. There are things that you simply can't say, and it doesn't matter whether it's transsexuals or whether it's race or whether it's now you criticize. Give you an example of this, an easy example which everybody will understand. If you criticize the genocide that's going on, for example, in Gaza at the moment, you're immediately labeled anti-Semitic. That's very bad. That's very bad for a political career. So what happens is that you find that politicians will not touch the subject. Give you an example of that. Nigel Farage at the moment is doing jolly well in the polls, and it looks like he's going to do jolly well. He's going to get elected and all that kind of thing. And it's mainly on unlimited immigration. And he bangs that drum and he sticks to that drum, but he doesn't touch anything else. He doesn't touch Julian Assange and the appalling he's being tortured to death in Belmarsh prison. He won't touch it because the Americans want to extradite him. And if he speaks against that, he'll upset Trump, who is a mate. And if he talks about genocide in Gaza, he'll upset the Zionist lobby, both in Parliament and politics, and of course Congress. That's a tough enemy to make. That's a tough enemy to make. They control the press, they control TV, they control Hollywood, all these problems. And it's now got so bad that we have other Jews who are not Zionists, and people often make the confusing, they get confused. Zionists and Jews, they're not the same thing. I've got many Jewish friends who are really lovely people who are horrified by what's going on in Gaza. They're not Zionists, and there's no shortage of people like that. So to suggest it's anti-Semitic if you're against genocide is positively ludicrous. But you won't find many politicians. We've only got one who actually speaks out, and he's the Workers' Party, George Galloway, and he's right on that one. You won't find a whisper from anybody else, even those who regard themselves as radicals like Nigel Farage. He will not mention it. So consequently, if you have a whole society that doesn't mention the elephant in the room, again, the old cliche is it's for evil to prevail, it only means that good men do nothing. And that's what you're dealing with here. Good men do nothing. You might add on top of that, if you're looking for a solution to this, is that we are now in Britain a secular society, and the United States, to a very large extent, is a secular society, with some exceptions in certain states. So this is so if you become a secular society, it's very easy to lose your moral dynamic. When we were a Christian society, which nobody would even bother to claim we are in Great Britain, or great swathes of America are now, you tend to become self-centered, me. You tend to be self-pitying. You tend to feel that everything that's gone wrong with your life is somebody else's fault. And this, instead of actually fighting your way out of it. And of course, who's a wonderful exponent of trying to criticize that view is Morgan Freeman, who has spoken out on many times. He said, for goodness sake, stop being so self-pitying. If you are black and poor, you're poor because you haven't worked hard enough at school. You haven't worked hard enough since you left school. He said, I'm black and I'm successful, and there are many black successful people. Don't blame the color of your skin. But he's a wonderful role model. But of course, there are plenty of other people who actually want people to feel that they've been prejudiced against by white privilege and all that kind of thing. It gives them a reason for being one of life's failures. But of course, the country of America and Great Britain, they're full of poor white people who are very often pretty stupid and lazy as well. It's nothing to do with the colour of your skin. It's just how God made us, isn't it? Some people are lazy and stupid, and some people are born losers, and some people aren't. That's how it is. But it's very difficult for you to say that. I can say that on podcasts, but I'd soon be. BBC won't have me on. Indeed, now here's an interesting point. I don't know whether I mentioned last time we spoke. I was due to give a lecture on the government of Lord Salisbury, one of the great conservative, old school conservative prime minister, who was incidentally a libertarian, if you read his speeches, which everybody gets a bit surprised about. I was giving a lecture to the undergraduates of the Conservative Association, Robertson College, Cambridge. I was deplatformed for a lecture on Lord Salisbury. How sensitive are these colleges and these universities? I was trying to give a lecture on Austrian School of Economics at Stirling University up there in Scotland to explain how Scotland could go it along if they developed the right economic principles. Deplatformed. I was actually promoting Scottish independence at Stirling University, not allowed to speak. And when I asked why, the response was, well, we didn't know what Mr. Bloom might say. And another thing, you're a young fellow, but when I was your age, we used to always say, oh, it's a free country. You never hear that now. You never, ever hear anybody say, oh, it's a free country. It's fallen out of our language, and it comes back to language. What can you say? What can't you say?
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I haven't heard that term in a long time. Okay, we don't have too much time in this conversation, certainly not as much as the last one. So I'm going to kind of swiftly move on to the next thing, which is something you've just covered. And my first question was going to be about Israel and Palestine and what you make of that. And obviously you kind of agree with what's my interpretation of this war, which is that there is a genocide happening in Gaza. I just want to go back a little bit before that, though, to this kind of initial incident that happened, this kind of, terrorist incident. What do you make of it? You're someone who has experience with kind of like war strategy and that kind of thing. And I look at what happened there with the idea that these people kind of came in from Palestine and just kind of breach the border. I find it should just be so unbelievable. If you like, from what we know about Israel and the focus and emphasis they have on security, I mean, it is the most secured border in the entire world, and people were just able to breach it with, seemingly, could they always have done this? It doesn't seem like anything particularly unique was done here. It was just waiting for the right time. Do you think there's more to that, Godfrey? Like, how did that all happen?
Well, I have had Colonel Doug McGregor on my channel. I follow Scott Ritter and people like this, Colonel McGregor, I particularly admire. He's been on my channel a number of times. He's a serious expert in his field. And his view was, he'd been there, Scott Ritter had been there, they've seen that border, they've seen it. And as you rightly say, it was unbelievably secure. It was in the line of perhaps North-South Korea, it was that kind of tightly run. And here's an interesting thing, talking about language and about what you can and cannot say. There is a cui bono. Who would benefit from that? Well, Netanyahu would. So if there was a reason to let them in or turn a blind eye so that the retaliation could be massive and bring the Israeli public with it, that's exactly what you would want to do. Let them come in, commit a few murders, do a bit of this, do a bit of that, make it terrorist, and then you can then say, well, what can we do? We've got to hunt down Hamas, and genocide's all right. Genocide's all right. And 80% of the Israeli population are in favor of this. But of course, if you open up and look behind the scenes, why is it genocide? Because they want the land for their pipelines. It's all about money. It was like the Syria. The Americans wanted a pipeline from Qatar. The Russians were offering a pipeline from Russia. And so the CIA facilitated a civil war. So this is what they're doing. And of course, one of the problems, a conservative actually said, I think it was a conservative politician who said, I'm just wondering whether the Israelis didn't actually facilitate that raid to allow them this kind of retaliation. He was kicked out. He was suspended. It was a perfectly reasonable view to take. It's a hypothesis. And so you can't even put forward a hypothesis because it's anti-Semitic. You can't speak because it's anti-Semitic. It's bollocks from start to finish. So you do have these problems. But of course, Hamas, and it was, they did this and they did that. But of course, when you're dealing with people, or you're dealing with journalists, you're dealing with people who take, the view that all this started when Hamas crossed the border and made a terrorist attack, which indeed it was. It started in 1917. That's when it started. When you actually gave A.J. Balfour colluded with the Rothschild family to give the Zionists a land, somebody else's country. That's how it started. And of course, everybody on the West Bank, vast numbers on the West Bank, are Jews from Brooklyn. They're living in Palestinian houses. And the idea of chucked out the Palestinians and put these people in houses. This is what's been going on. And of course, the Israeli state was built very largely on a form of terrorism, the Stern-Gan, Ergun, bombs, blowing up the King David Hotel. Nobody ever talks. Everybody goes, "Oh, it's a Holocaust," and all that was terrible, and that was terrible, and that was ghastly. The Germans, were culpable for that. Yes, but just a minute. They've now run up their colours. They've run up their colours, the Zionists, because they're now doing to the Palestinians what Hitler did to them. There is no, and it doesn't matter. I'm not pro-Palestinian, incidentally, or anti-anything like that. I've never taken much interest in that because I think it's a problem, as Enoch Powell said. The trouble is, when people think there's a problem, there's a solution. Where there's a problem, there's a solution. There isn't a solution, so you might as well move on and walk away from it because there is no bloody solution. And it's going to go on, and it's been going on. It's going to go on for 1,000 years. However, this comes me back to my moral point. There can be no justification, in my view, for genocide of this nature, killing thousands and thousands of women and children. This is unacceptable behavior. Full stop. There's no ifs or buts. But of course, Parliament and Congress are full of people with ifs and buts. Oh, yes. And there are many, many who won't accept it's genocide. I don't quite know what the definition of genocide is, but I think if you're killing thousands and thousands and thousands of women and children to clear them out of the land, that's genocide to me. And it's unacceptable. In fact, I'm not a hypocrite. I took the same view of carpet bombing of Germany in the last war under Air Marshal Harris. I thought that was a mistake. It was militarily useless, as we found out after the war. Didn't do any good. It extended the war, because if you kill thousands and thousands of women and children, you do not lay the ground for a peace later on. You have to. So you've taken away the platform to actually have a peaceful solution. And then, of course, with the amount of Muslims that are now in America and Great Britain, so you have the power of the state is pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist. So you have your politicians who are pro-Zionist. You have your media, which is pro-Zionist. But people actually on the streets, in their tens and tens of thousands who are Muslims, they control the streets. So we're in a very, very unpleasant situation at the moment, and no good will come of it. And it can only get worse. Again, why can't we sit around a table? Why can't we actually try and work out some kind of peaceful solution? And we're never going to do that while America and Britain supply bombs to bomb women and children shoveled in from Cyprus in the base of Akrotiri, which I've actually visited in the old days. It's unacceptable, and we need people who we got as Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, who thinks it's perfectly acceptable. He thinks genocide's okay. He's a self-confessed Zionist. And so is Boris Johnson. You know, where do you go when you have this lack of moral dynamic at the top of the house? And I'm sad to say it extends to the Archbishop of Canterbury and the King. Yeah. Charles has no moral dynamic. Justin Welby has no moral dynamic. I think he's agnostic. If he was a true Christian, he'd be speaking out, wouldn't he now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because I've heard people kind of compare this, and you listen to people like Ben Shapiro or someone like this on his podcast, and every single time it's like, oh, well, we were attacked first. Israel was attacked first. It's like, yeah, I mean, Israel was attacked by essentially, a ragtag group. And you could say, oh, well, they are reflective of the leadership in that country, so it's a state attack or whatever. But, it's kind of like during, I guess, like the IRA or something like that, the IRA bombings in the UK, it's like us saying, well, we're going to go and basically indiscriminately kill Irish people. I mean, everyone in Britain would probably reasonably accept that that's completely unacceptable and that you have to treat the perpetrators of crimes differently from the general population. But for some reason, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, that all goes out of the window. And ironically, sometimes these are the same people who are, preaching about, like race issues. And yet people of a different race somehow are being treated according to different standards than you would like white British or white Irish people. Do you see what I'm saying? That it's a complete conflict of ideologies, it's a complete conflict of ethics.
I'm very glad you brought that up, because I made that point to somebody a few weeks ago. If our reaction had been to bomb the Catholic Quarter using the Royal Air Force, the Catholic Quarter of Belfast and Londonderry, we would be condemned totally by the whole world, and rightly so.
Yeah.
And we didn't do that. We went in and we eventually negotiated a peace, but then eventually you have to man up. Now, the problem they have with the IDF and the soldiers, from what I've seen of the clips, they're not real men anymore. They were in 1967. They were good soldiers and they did this and they did that. Okay, fair enough. I'm not disputing that. But these sort of people who are, hitting 7 or 8 year old children around their heads with bloody rifle butts and stuff and all this kind of thing. These people disgust me. But they don't disgust Ben Shapiro or Lord Cameron. And the point is, it tells you Ben Shapiro obviously has no moral dynamic. He thinks he does. He claims to have, but he doesn't really. I mean, you could have somebody beats you up in the street or nicks your wallet, for example. You wouldn't go round and find his cousin and his cousin's children and murder all his cousin's children, would you? Well, where would that take anybody? What kind of moral dynamic is that? So, and of course, Ben Shapiro is one of a genre, isn't he? He is.
Yeah.
There are too many people with this hypocritical, deeply offensive point of view when it comes to actually the murder of women and children. It's wrong, full stop. There's no argument for it, not tit for tat. And to pretend that it all started with a Hamas attack over the border a few years ago, that is absolutely ludicrous. It started in 1917. Let's actually call it what it is. Very annoying.
Yeah. Sticking with war then, Godfrey, I don't think in our last conversation we really touched much on what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and kind of like the wider spread of this war. I don't know about you, and I don't know, kind of like how much you're reading about it, how much you're watching about it, how much you're studying this topic. I certainly am not doing that much. I have not actually paid too much attention to it. I have to be honest. So I am pretty ignorant on this topic generally. However, I've got the feeling that they are gearing up for full-scale war. NATO looks like they're going to enter this. First of all, I just want to know whether you agree with that assessment. And second of all, I guess, is there a way to avoid it? Is there a way that we can avoid going into full-scale World War III? Because it looks to me like that's where we're going. And although I say this with a kind of disbelief in my heart, as I say it, it seems crazy that I'm saying these things. Is World War III finally here? But I'm every day I'm believing it more and more.
Well, there's quite a lot on my website about this. I have been taking, and it's because it's geopolitical military. That's what I do. That's what I do. When I was at Sandhurst, which is a hell of a long time ago, incidentally, we had a Russian studies professor, Chris Donnelly, who's, I think, still a very senior professor of geopolitical studies. And he taught us how to try and see things from the Russian point of view. And it's only about 8 or 9 minutes. It's on my website. It's the Russian point of view. And I've done a video on it. And I've done a lot of other stuff on it since. Now, if you take the Russian point of view, they've been invaded on a number of occasions over the centuries, over the last 400 or 500 years. And they fear invasion. And at the end of 1945, when they'd been, and the military casualties and the civilian casualties in the 1939-45 war were huge. We're talking millions and millions and millions. They then wanted buffer states. The Soviet Union was a disgusting regime, incidentally. I'm not defending it, but they wanted buffer states. So they wanted those East European, all great powers like friendly nations on their borders, or okay, friendly at the point of a bayonet, maybe. And that's what you need to do. Well, NATO, which in my day was a defensive treaty, it was to defend Western Europe from the Soviet Union. That was the point of it. And many a year I spent with the 4th Armored Division in Germany, freezing my balls off in February, looking at Russians and East Germans across the wire. So I've done my bit. I'm not anti-NATO, I've done my bit. Suddenly, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we've gone mad. We've extended NATO up through the Baltics, through all the Eastern European countries like Poland and Romania, so on and so forth, which we said we wouldn't do, which we promised that we wouldn't do on the collapse. So we've reneged on that, and now we're trying to get the Ukraine into NATO. Well, the Ukraine has a border of something like about 1,300 kilometers, for example. So it's a very long border. It's difficult to defend. It's all rivers and forests and stuff like that. So the Russians take the view, if you join NATO, and Finland and Sweden have just joined NATO, goodness knows why they would do that, sacrificing hundreds of years of, in Sweden's case, of neutrality. Bloody stupid thing to do, but that's politicians for you. What's the first thing that happens? The Americans nip over there and build a base, and they put their rockets in it and all the rest of it. And Russia quite rightly feels threatened by that, and they don't want that on the Ukraine border. So they made it quite clear, and they wrote to Jens Stoltenberg, and they said, do not do this. It's a step too far. Jens Stoltenberg, which is in the public domain, the Secretary General of NATO, said, it's none of your damn business. That's what he said. Not very diplomatic. It's none of your business whether Ukraine joins NATO or not. So Liz Truss was the Foreign Secretary at the time of Britain, and she went over to Moscow and spoke with Putin. And she came back, and Putin said she just wasn't listening. Liz Truss just wasn't listening. We said we will not accept two things. We will not accept the Ukraine as being part of NATO. We won't accept that. We consider that as an existential threat to the Russian Federation. And the treatment and murder of ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine, in the Donbass, has got to stop. And that started in 2014. And there was something like 15,000 casualties attacked by Ukraine forces in the eastern Donbass, which nobody talks about. Nobody talks about. So you have cities like Odessa, Kharkov, and these cities in the east of Ukraine who are ethnically Russian, Russian-speaking, and Orthodox Christian. And Putin put a small force in, a relatively small force, thinking he could bring to the table the Ukraine and the Americans bring to the table. Look, I'm serious. Liz Truss wouldn't believe me. Here we are. I'm pretty bloody serious. But it was a small force, a cutting out force to protect people in the eastern Donbass. It wasn't big enough. He made an error of judgment, and he had to go back and rearm and rethink the thing. But he wanted to get round a table, and in February 2022. There was a peace brokered between the Western Ukraine and the Russians. It was signed, sealed, and delivered in Turkey under Turkish supervision. Boris Johnson went down there and tore up the agreement. He said, no, keep the war going. We'll give you everything you need to beat the Russians. And that's what he said, and that's what happened. Now, here's an interesting thing. I was alive in the Cuba Missile Crisis, when Kennedy said, we will not accept nuclear missiles in Cuba. It's too close to our coast. It's right on our doorstep. We will not accept it. And the Russians, the Soviet Union, backed down, but there was diplomacy going on behind the scenes. So they were talking to each other, and the Americans made some concessions about missiles and nuclear weapons in Turkey, which never gets talked about now. But there were some concessions. But the key thing was we were all afraid, when I was a young man, of nuclear war. We were afraid. We were deeply afraid of nuclear war, and we were right to be so. So the thought was, even with the Soviet Union and the Americans, the last thing we want is a nuclear war. Now, we have lost our fear of nuclear war. We have lost that fear. And that's very dangerous, because nuclear powers, mutual assured destruction, has kept the peace between the great powers for a long time. So now we have this situation where we've lost the fear of it. The Americans, and all this is run by Washington, of course, we're just the poodles. I mean, Boris Johnson and Cameron, poodles. They're just poodles. They do as they're told. Good little doggy. What actually happens, Washington will not negotiate, and they have said they will not negotiate, and they're telling the Ukrainians, you've got to keep fighting, and beat Russia, of which, of course, there's absolutely no chance whatsoever now, because the Russians now have 1.5 million men in uniform reserves, and the most effective war machine that we have seen since 1945. Believe me, I know about these things. I don't know as much as Colonel Douglas McGregor. He knows about integrated warfare. Or my immediate knowledge of integrated warfare finished about 1990, and it's moved on since then quite considerably. There's no way the Ukrainians can win. Zero, none. It's virtually over now. It's all over by the shouting. But we're not talking. We had a peace conference in Switzerland, didn't we, just a few weeks ago? The Russians weren't invited. I mean, what kind of peace conference do you have when you don't invite the major belligerent? You couldn't invent the stupidity, but it brings me back to my attitude to people who pull the strings, if you will. Yep, okay, in Washington. You have no idea, and I suspect none of my viewers or your viewers have any idea, just how stupid These people are dangerously stupid. And they've got their Brooks Brothers shirts, their Brooks Brothers, they're articulate, they've had a haircut, they're looking pretty cool. But scrape the surface and you're dealing with absolute morons. I shit you not, you're dealing with morons. But of course, they think they can push it to the wire. No Americans are dying. That's the difference between this and Vietnam. Yet another war they lost. How many wars could they lose? Now, the problem that they have, that we have, no American boys are dying. So they're quite happy to send the dollars and send money to a corrupt regime, and DeSantis is creaming it all off. They're all creaming it all off. But it's over. I suspect by October, the whole thing will be over. But Putin is saying, for God's sake, why can't we cut a deal? We had a deal. Let's cut a deal. He doesn't want to take over the Western Ukraine. Who wants to govern the West Ukraine, which is a shithole? Nobody wants to govern it. He just wants neutrality. And what a lot of people watching probably this clip won't know is Austria is not a member of NATO. Austria is not a member of NATO. They have maintained their neutrality since 1945. Why can't Ukraine be neutral? Why do they have to be a member of NATO? They've got wonderful soil, it's agricultural. Why can't they just be friends and trade with everybody and get rid of their own corruption? Why must they join NATO? What madness is this? And what's it got to do with Great Britain? It's nothing to do with us. It's just like the Great War. Everybody now wonders why we got in the Great War in 1914 over Serbia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire having a fight. What was it to do with us? It cost us 3 million British Empire casualties. 3 million. And if you look at the headstones, if you walk on the Somme or Ypres or Arras and these places, young men killed in their millions. It's disgusting and it's disgraceful. And we're going down the same route again. But of course, it won't be Cameron that gets his head shot off, will it? It'll be ordinary working Joe's sons that get shot. Not Cameron and his family, the bastard.
Godfrey, there's so much I would love to get into there. Not just about the current war situation in Ukraine and Russia and how that might escalate and continue, but also about the First World War, because I've heard you talk about this a little bit before, and I'd love to get a bit more history there as well. But I know that you have an appointment, and we're going to have to cut this one short, unfortunately. So I'll just give you the opportunity now to kind of see this one out, let people know where they can find you and all the rest of it. But yeah, for me, it's been really, really great having you on again. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And next time we'll try and get in maybe a bit more time if you're up for a round 3, so that we can kind of dive into these issues a little bit more deeply, because there's a lot of knowledge to be had here, and it's always great getting your takes on things. So thank you for me. Let people know where they can find you, and I look forward to the next one.
My best place to get, if you want my stuff, which is all up on my website, which is just plain godfreybloom.uk. Easy, godfreybloom.uk. You'll find transcripts of lectures I've given on the Great War and all sorts of stuff there. The Russian point of view, stuff that you won't get in mainstream media. I make an absolute point of doing stuff that you won't find in mainstream media, so you don't have to. So you can cut out the bullshit. I also have a lot of guests. I have clips on guests, quite distinguished guests: Colonel Doug McGregor, Alistair MacLeod on various things. So there's plenty there to go through, and I do hope you enjoy it. And I would love to come back and cover whatever you want to cover, but I will bore you to death on the Great War. It's my specialist subject, believe me.
Okay, I look forward to that one. Cheers, Godfrey.
Toodaloo.